wherever you're joining us from. My name is Paul, and I am super excited to welcome everyone to today's Ocean Leadership Series. Okay, so as we see, we just start straight up. People are joining, and it is being recorded, and also will be live streamed on YouTube, which means that we'll have live viewers here on Zoom, and also people will be joining from YouTube. So we have our guest speaker here already. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction about Aquaworld. Then I bring in our speaker, Spanos, joining us from the United States. So first, it's super amazing having everyone here. The Ocean Leadership Series is a program by Aquaworld that we use to empower young people from different countries and different continents globally about context, applicable knowledge, and information on marine conservation, and also career pathways in marine sustainability. So we welcome every one of you here to our early birds that join. Just 1 minute into it, and we have early birds already. Welcome to every one of you. We will not keep you waiting so much because it is recorded. So those that would join us and flow with us. And for those who would miss any part of it, all they have to do is just go to our YouTube channel and watch the recording once we publish it live. So they would not miss so much. But with the early bird, we have an advantage of flowing, and we that are joining live on YouTube, on Zoom, have the opportunity to ask questions. So briefly, I'm just going to introduce Aquaworld to everyone briefly. So our website is aquaworld.org.ng. So Aquaworld is a non-governmental organization that is dedicated to implementing creative solutions to promote marine protection and deploying pragmatic approaches to improve the values of coastal communities. Right. So our mission is, sorry, please. Our mission is to empower coastal communities as well as young minds through creative and pragmatic initiative aimed at marine protection, climate resilience, and improved livelihoods of both young people and also coastal communities. And we are a team of young minds, we are a team of great minds, we are a team of young people who are very passionate, focused, and deep-rooted in marine conservation. So we have our board of advisors taking you through, who also Mr. Panos is our advisor for global ocean governance and sustainability. So he's our advisor for that. And we have Bright Mind as our executive committee members. And so just taking you through everything. And you can catch an highlight of everything we've done, our heat map over the years, places that we've touched down physically in the globe. You get to see. So once you go to our heat map, you can look at our footprints at different parts of the world. You can click, you know what we've done at different parts of the world, and you can see our project database, right, from Nigeria to Ghana. And you can also read more information about us on our homepage. The project implemented, communities engaged, volunteers, countries reached, communities impacted, recognition, and all of that. And you can also get, you can see also our partners over the years. Okay, without wasting time, I would move straight. Thank you everyone once again to our early birds that joined. Today's Ocean Leadership Series is titled Understanding Ocean Governance Globally and Regionally. And I would not tell you what we want to talk about. I would leave that for the speaker. So briefly, I would just run through the profile of our speaker. Panos Smyrnios, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is a multilingual conservation professional with over 6 years of global experience, advancing sustainable fisheries management, biodiversity conservation, both marine and terrestrial, and international ocean literacy. His work spans the Americas, the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa, supporting inclusive science-based solution to critical ocean challenges. And I can really attest to that. I met Mr. Panos in 2023 during the Global Ocean Leadership for Climate Resilience Fisheries Fellowship. Yes, and I think we were about 20 or 25 fellows. And during the fellowship, it would create tools to guide our implementation, tools that enables that our solution solves the problem we are addressing locally, but using a global approach. And I'm also happy to share that due to the mentorship, then we were able to implement the project which he mentored. That's Fisher's Prep, and Fisher's Prep was nominated for a pitching contest in Greece. So and we were like top 5 finalists. So he's deep rooted in his work, and he has held multiple roles across NGOs like Environmental Defense Fund and Legacy Work, and governments such as U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration (NOAA), known as NOAA. So contributing to policy development, diplomacy, conservation finance, resource management, and leadership development. He has been actively involved in global efforts addressing illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We hear IUU, promoting sustainable ocean governance and strengthening international cooperation on ocean sustainability. He is particularly passionate about climate ocean nexus and ensuring that ocean governance initiatives are inclusive, science-informed, and community-driven. Panos currently supports organizations like Aquaworld in scaling marine protection and governance innovation across West Africa, while empowering youth-led solutions for a more sustainable and equitable ocean future. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us welcome Mr. Panos with clapping ovation in the chat box, using emojis, using reaction. Let's welcome everyone. Can we use our clapping yes emojis to welcome him? Welcome, Mr. Panos.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Great to be here with you all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and should I go ahead and start, Paul?
Yes, please. You can go ahead and start. The floor is yours.
Great. So let me just set up my computer here really quick. But yeah, great to be here with you all. Again, thank you for the time. And hopefully this is going to be a helpful session for you from a leadership standpoint and learning a little bit about how the ocean is governed globally and regionally. So, I see a lot of you here, and I'm sure you're here because you have a passion and an interest in ocean conservation. So, I'd be interested to know, where do you all work in ocean conservation? Can some people speak or put in the chat where they work and what type of work they do with ocean conservation? And if you don't work in ocean conservation, just whatever you actually work in. Actually, that'd be great to know. Research from Aziz, great. Thank you for sharing, Aziz. Research and community-driven projects from Paul. Operations and sales. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And Sherif Dean. I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you for sharing a little bit about what some of you all do. And as you see, we have research, community-driven projects, and things like that. So one of the things I'll talk about today is how those roles fit into the global ocean governance system. I think it's very important that we have researchers, policy, technical people. But what we'll talk about today is really how everything fits together. When I started my career about 6, 7 years ago, maybe 8 at this point, um, I had an understanding of some of the science that went into ocean governance and ocean conservation, such as things like acidification, fishery management, and those sort of things, and developing ocean governance plans and resource management plans, whether that's at a local level, whether that's at a national level, like for the country of Nigeria, or a regional level, national, and global. So, I had an understanding of these things, but it wasn't until I started interacting with them in the real world where I really developed my understanding of ocean governance structures and ocean governance frameworks and really learning about how it all works together in order to create change and in order to create sustainable pathways for the future. So I'm really excited to share just a little bit about the way this works and the way I've seen it work with you all today. And let me go ahead and share my slides here. Great. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see your screen very clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Let me. Apologies, everyone. I want to give me one moment. I need to pull this over here. Thank you for the patience. Oh. Okay. Sorry, I'm having just an issue with my screen, but I think I fixed it here.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Great. There we go. So what we'll cover today, or what I'll discuss a bit, and I really want it to be an open discussion, so I will be speaking and going over these materials. But if anybody has any questions at any time, please throw it in the chat or speak up, and I'd love to be able to respond to that as they come up. I think this conversation today can be natural, like in a way that we're sitting in a coffee shop, or at a restaurant. So if anybody has any questions they have at any point, please speak up. I would love for this to be conversational, and I think we all have a lot to learn from each other. We have researchers here, people that work in operations and sales. I'm sure there's other folks who didn't comment. So there's a lot of expertise here in the room, and I'd love for us to be able to share that as things come up. So what I will be talking about is we'll go over the fundamentals of ocean governance. So really talking about what is ocean governance and what do we mean by that term. And then we'll get into the key issues that ocean governance is trying to solve right now in the modern world and in the oceans that spread from the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, everywhere. And then we'll talk about some of the major stakeholders. And by stakeholders, we mean the major individuals, major organizations that are part of the ocean governance ecosystem and that are responsible for really making the decisions for the way that our ocean is managed. And then I'll get into some case studies. So some examples in real life of how ocean governance actually happens. It's one of those things that we talk about it and we have ideas of how ocean governance um, is happening and how fish are being managed, or how ecosystems and coral reefs or mining in the ocean is being managed. But we're going to get into the specifics about some real world scenarios of how these resources are being managed. And then we'll talk about some opportunities and actions that you all can take to be a part of the global and regional ocean governance framework. So, why do we need ocean governance? I think it's something that we all think and we all assume is important. But let's talk about the reasons why we need it, and to be very specific about that. In the same way that we have laws in our countries about how you can drive, or what you can and can't do. You can't steal. You can't do certain things. You have to pay taxes. In the same way we have all of these rules in the countries we live in, the the world has developed these rules for the ocean. And the reasons we need these rules is there's many reasons, and there's a lot more than is on the screen right now. But these are just some of the main reasons of why we need ocean governance. So the first is the tragedy of the commons. So I'm sure all of you, especially the researchers and those in the room who have really focused on academia, have heard of the tragedy of the commons, or have learned about the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons is really saying the negative impact that happens in the world when individuals um, behave in a way that benefits themselves but has negative drawbacks. Um, and the issue, though, is that what one person feels as a negative impact is just a little bit. But if everybody does these things, then the commons, which is the resources, the world that we all share, the ocean doesn't belong to one individual person. It's really the world's. But the tragedy of the commons is that everybody behaves, we'll call it in a way, selfishly, then the commons is really impacted. And the example for that would be fishing and overfishing. So if I go out and I catch, uh, you know, 10 fish, but there's only 12 fish out in the ocean. Obviously, there's a lot more, but let's just say 10 and 12 to make it easy. Then that means the next person can only catch two. But unfortunately, that's not how people act. Everybody's going to go and they're going to catch as many fish as they can, or as many fish as they feel is acceptable. But if everybody does that, we reach a point where there's severe overfishing. And that's an example of the tragedy of the commons. One more example of that, and the reason I'm giving examples is because I do think this is a very important area to understand in the terms of why we really need governance and why governance is essential to governing the ocean. Something that, again, is common to all people. It does not belong to one person. But one more example is pollution, and I'm talking about everyday life. So littering and throwing your trash on the street. If you're walking down the street and you eat some food, but there's no trash can anywhere near, and you throw a piece of trash on the street, that's not the biggest impact on you individually. It's just one little piece of trash on the street, might not look that great, but it's not, this crazy big deal. But the problem is, if everybody treats the commons like that, that's to say the street that nobody owns the street. It's the neighbor's streets, the community street. If everybody throws their trash on the street, then all of a sudden you have a street full of trash, and then all of a sudden it's a very big problem. And that really is the tragedy of the commons, and that is what the ocean is most at risk for, whether it's pollution, overfishing, mining. I'm sure you've all heard, seabed mining is becoming a bigger issue. It's something that's growing. Um, but all these different things and habitat destruction, if we don't understand the impacts of these things and have a structure around limiting our impacts on the commons, we can end up in a very, very bad spot with the ocean, similar to the street, where it becomes completely destroyed because of many, many, many individual actions. So that's the one of the main issues that the oceans face is the tragedy of the commons. And that's one of the reasons that we need to develop governance. We'll talk about what actually governance means. And then next is the provision of public goods. So again, the ocean is a public place. The international ocean, I should be specific, is a public place. Each national, each nation has their ocean in their EEZ, which is 200 miles from the shore. But outside of that, it is the world's ocean. It's a common place. So we need to decide, we need to come together, and this is what the United Nations did about 50, 60 years ago, is it decided we need to come together and decide how do we share the ocean resources with each other. We can't let each individual country do whatever it wants, or we end up again at the tragedy of the commons. So the whole point of international governance, again, and we'll get more into what that means, but is really deciding and agreeing upon a framework of how to share the public goods in the ocean. And if you think about it as a pie, how to share that pie or a pasta or whatever. If you're eating with your friends, you have a meal in front of you, you decide who gets what and how it's evenly and equally shared. And that's something that's very important. And again, we'll talk about is really focusing on how do we have equal and equitable governance where one country isn't benefiting more than another country. And unfortunately, this is very hard to do. But that's where community leadership comes into play. And it's one of the benefits of governance is it ocean governance provides a framework, a platform for community leadership and for the communities, the nations that share the ocean, that they can really decide what they want the ocean to look like. So ocean governance provides a tangible framework for communities to get together and decide how rules are made. And without a specific ocean governance structure, there would be nothing to hold all these communities together and to be able to share in the decision-making process. So from a issues standpoint, why do we need an ocean governance? I just talked about some of the kind of theories of why ocean governance is needed in the world. But now I want to focus on specific examples of why ocean governance is needed and what can happen if ocean governance isn't done well. So as you can see here, pollution, overfishing, habitat loss. Those are just some of the examples of what impacts our oceans in a negative way. In terms of pollution, we have plastics every year, thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of plastic being released into the ocean. And sometimes it might be little bits from a boat. Sometimes it's from a giant landfill in a particular country that's by the ocean. But this plastic and this pollution, heavy metals, oil, chemicals, all this is being released into the ocean. So if we don't come together and decide how to limit this, we're going to have very, very big issues in the decades to come. And this is a really big reason why we need ocean governance. And the reasons we're seeing these issues in the real world is because ocean governance, unfortunately, hasn't been effective enough to stop these issues. So we've done well in developing an ocean governance structure, but that does not mean it's working perfectly. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is how to really make that work well. Overfishing, I already gave examples of that, but excessive overfishing um, is leading to the collapse of many, many species of fish. So currently, about 70% of fish species are overfished, and that number, unfortunately, is continuing to grow. And that's because as the demand for seafood increases, the fish populations are not increasing. They're being subject to more and more fishing, which makes it harder for them to reproduce, and that leads to less and less fish over time. So overfishing is an area where ocean governance is essential and where we've actually seen a lot of success. And habitat loss due to human activities like trawling and warming seas and all of that, and all of that. But warming seas and boats and things like that is leading to habitat loss, which is going to have really big impacts. And another reason we need ocean governance. So, what is ocean governance in the terms of a global view? I think a lot of us know what it might look like at a local view, at a national view, but what does it look like from a global standpoint where, again, the ocean is a public good, nobody owns the ocean. So how do we split up the power of countries and of organizations that share the ocean resources in a way that people can come together and make decisions that we're going to listen to? So, in terms of governance, before I get into the actual structures, let's talk about what really governance is. Governance is developing, like I mentioned, but it's developing laws, it's coming to an agreement, and it's developing very specific decisions and criteria of how decisions are made that countries need to abide by. And governance is something that it's at its core, governance is a power structure. And it's a way of spreading power in a way that people can make decisions together to hold others accountable with that power. So, policemen are part of a governance structure against crime. The fishery ministries in countries are part of a governance structure for fisheries. The president or a prime minister of a country is the leader of a governance structure. So a governance structure really is, again, a way to decide how things need to operate and developing rules to exercise power upon stakeholders and individuals to make sure that those agreed upon rules are actually followed. And that's a very important point because, we decide on a lot of things in the world. We decide, climate change is bad, or we decide overfishing is bad. But that decision is not a part of governance. It's something that can be an influence to governance, but that is not in itself governance. Governance is really assigning power and using laws to exercise power. And that at its core, again, is what governance is. And fortunately, we have, as a world, developed a system, and that's what I'm going to start getting into now, for how to govern the oceans and how to exercise power in the oceans and governance power in the oceans. So it's split up the way governance works in the oceans. And I'm sure you all know this, but this is just important to talk about and to frame us, is governance starts at the international level. It goes to the regional level, the national level, and then the local level, like a community level. And all these different systems all interact with each other. The international influences the regional influences the national, and the national influences the local. And sometimes they can operate separately, but for the majority, for the most part, this is how it works. So our talk today is about international and regional governance. So the key international regional organizations, that the way that our oceans are managed is really these organizations that you see here. So the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, as it's referred to, is the main international law that governs how countries use and protect the ocean. So this law says things like you must respect national waters and not fish within national waters. This law talks about, sets up the regional management of migratory fish. One of the things we're going to talk about today talks about pollution. You can't just go out in the ocean and pollute. That is illegal. And then recently, the High Seas Treaty, which I think you probably all have heard about, is the third part of this Law of the Sea, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. So that really sets up, the High Seas Treaty really sets up biodiversity management in the oceans, which is a new thing, and that's something we'll talk about. But again, what's important to understand is the law. This law of the sea is what is the terms, the text that outlines how governance in the ocean, in the international ocean, is going to be run. So the United Nations is the actual body that implements this law. So the United Nations are the people that are working together and working with nations, working with regional bodies, and the people that are actually doing the work. That's the United Nations. So the United Nations is the main organization, the largest organization in the terms of international ocean governance. They're the ones that develop the Sustainable Development Goals that help outline where funding should go. They help suggest policy, and they're the ones that help sign policy into the Law of the Sea. So the United Nations, again, is really the administrator of international ocean governance. Within the United Nations, there's different organizations that govern different aspects, the main areas of ocean interactions. So the International Maritime Organization really develops rules and safety for shipping and prevents marine pollution from shipping vessels. So all these vessels, all these oil tankers that are going around the world, going through the oceans, they must adhere to the International Maritime Organization, their laws and their rules. Again, governed by the overall law of the sea and the UN. The International Seabed Authority is who controls the mining activities and resource extraction from the deep ocean floor. This is an organization that has helped restrict mining, but really hasn't been used very much up until very recently, the last 10 to 20 years, where there's been a very big push by private industry to start mining the bottom of the sea. The International Seabed Authority is who covers mining issues. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea is the judicial body that settles disputes regarding ocean law. So when countries argue about what a law means, that's the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. So the judges, the barristers, basically. And then the Regional Fisheries Management Organization, RFMOs, these are very important. These are who govern international fisheries. So and this is probably, out of all of these, this is one of the longest standing bodies of international ocean governance. They're the ones who manage fishing limits in specific ocean areas, and we'll get into that soon on what those look like. And then the national governments, so the United States, Nigeria, uh, Egypt, Spain, Italy, all the nations, they all have um, they all obviously exercise sovereignty of their own waters. But m many of those laws, if they're part of these organizations, which the majority of countries are, they must adhere to the laws in that are developed at the international level. So things um, like highly migratory fish, like tuna, is something that's set at the international level, but it needs to get enforced at the national level. So the national governments, although it might not seem like it, but they're very important to this international governance structure because they're at the end of the day who needs to make sure that their people, their citizens, are following the international laws. So this is just one example. We don't have time today to go through all of these organizations, every single thing they do. I highly suggest you all look into it if you don't know much about this area. Look into the area of oceans that you're really interested in. So is it mining, or is it fishing, or is it pollution? Like, what is the area of ocean sustainability that you're really interested in, and find the international organization that's responsible for that area and learn a bit about it. It's very interesting how all these organizations operate, where they're based, and how they're funded, and how they actually do the work. So, highly suggest you look into those um, and learn a bit. So we don't have time to go through all of them. But I will talk about the regional fishery management organizations as something that's a really good example of how international governance works. So you have the main, again, international law of the sea. The law of the sea needs to find an efficient way to govern fisheries. And every fishery is different, and every fishery is um, is is unique in the sense of the geography, the species of the fish, and the countries that are part of that fishery. So what the International Law of the Sea did is develop the regional fishery management organizations. And though there are, I think, 8 or 9 of them, I'm kind of forgot the exact number, but there's about 8 or 9, 8 to 10 fishery management organizations around the world. And they are responsible for managing that body of international water. So as you can see in the map, they everywhere from the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Arctic regions. We catch the international commercial fishing industry catches fish in all these places. And the regional fishery management organizations do a good job of using science to set up laws, or using science to identify what is needed in fishery management. So doing stock assessments to see how many fish of a certain species exist, what's the healthy level, and how many we can take out from that fishery stock. And fish go to restaurants and extract from the ocean. How many fish can we be taking out a year? So the science goes into that. Then policies are set to say specifically X amount of tuna, X amount of squid, of calamari, X amount of cod can be extracted from the ocean every year, and this is how much goes to all these different countries. So it's a very interesting, if you think about it, it sounds very hard to do, and it is. But this is a really good example of how humans, all of us, have come together to develop a structure of managing the ocean that actually works. So, you have all of these fisheries and they develop rules and people follow them. And we'll get into a success story right after this next slide. I'm going to talk about a success story that shows really how regional fishery management organizations and how the international and regional governance structures that we have led to successes in ocean management. So before I, well, actually, I'll get into that in a moment. So I actually will, I'm going to go over the example now. My slides, I should have put them in a different structure. So let's look at a case study for a really good success story of how international ocean governance has stepped in, used laws, used governing power to save the ocean from humans. Humans do a lot of good things, but sometimes we don't treat the environment in the way we should. And that's, again, why ocean governance is essential. And this is an example of where ocean governance was used successfully. So the Eastern Atlantic bluefin tuna is something that is heavily fished in the United States, is heavily fished in Europe. People love eating tuna. They're a very high market value fish. People like the taste of it. It's a really large fish, so it's a very impressive fish to catch. Um, and the industry for bluefin tuna is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So what happened is this led to really, really high fishing pressure all throughout the 80s and the 90s and the 1980s, the 1990s, and the early 2000s, when industrial fishing really became global. So before you'd have boats, you'd go out with a fishing rod and you'd catch these fish, or you'd have boats and you'd have nets, small nets to catch these fish. And although fishing overfishing can happen like that, it's hard to do at a massive, massive scale where you are making the fish stocks of an international species like tuna, bringing them down to the thousands instead of being in the millions where they should be. So, what happened in the 80s and 90s is you have boats now with giant, giant nets that can be a mile long, gill nets and things like that to catch these species. You have long lines, which you have a very long line, fishing line with thousands of hooks, and this line can stretch to multiple miles of line with hooks, and these are called long line vessels. And you must imagine there's hundreds of boats from all these different countries, the United States, Italy, Norway, England, all these different countries fishing for these fish in the Atlantic and in the Mediterranean. That's one species of these bluefin is it's the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And you have all these boats fishing for them every day, all night, and the numbers plummeted. So between the 80s and the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, so like by 2005, 2006, we realized that over 80% of all bluefin tuna in the Atlantic Ocean have been fished, and the stocks were at critical levels. The species became endangered, and um, it faced collapse. So we got to the point in the mid 2000s, or like 2005, 2006, where scientists realized, researchers, like I know we have some researchers here, they did stock assessments. They realized we are at risk of losing bluefin tuna in the Atlantic forever. If this continues, there will not be enough fish to reproduce, to breed, and this species could face collapse like other species that have existed in history that have left. And it reached a very, very serious point with bluefin tuna. So the intervention that came in is ICAT, um, what was it? The International, sorry, Conservation for Atlantic Tuna forgot what the international. If anyone knows, please let me know. But I forget the names. There's so many names of the regional fishery management organizations. But the important part is the fishery management organization, the RFMO, as people call them, that is responsible for managing the Atlantic Ocean. They did the studies. The scientists that are part of this organization did the studies and found what I was just talking about, that this species face collapse. So they introduced the science to all the member countries that are part of ICAT. They all voted. Two-thirds need to pass for the vote, and two-thirds of the countries voted. I think it was more than two-thirds, but two-thirds is the bottom limit of the countries voted to do something about this and to help save Atlantic bluefin tuna. So they reduced catches, total international catches that all these countries can do. They reduced it by 50%. And then they also launched a satellite tracking initiative to address illegal fishing, to help make sure that the laws are enforced. So by reducing the amount that each country is allowed to catch in half by 50%, and using satellites and using international and national coast guards to find illegal fishermen, they were able to reduce the catches of bluefin tuna by, again, about 50%. And what this did, it was very successful. And within 3 years, there was a 400% increase in tuna populations, which is really remarkable and shows the incredible ability and the incredible resilience of these ocean species. But the good news is that Atlantic bluefin have made a incredible recovery due to this international governance structure, and they are now they're not in incredible shape. They're still far below pre-industrial levels, but they're no longer endangered, and their populations have shown that they're continuing to rise every year, which is a very strong sign that they're on the path to recovery. Um, so again, a really impressive and a very optimistic example of how these international laws are actually effective and and make a difference. So going now to the ocean management ecosystem that's part of this governance structure. I know I focused a lot on the governments, so the United Nations, the regional fishery management organizations, and the national governments that are responsible for international and regional governance and policy. I focused a lot on the governments. They're very important. That's why the governments develop the policies that inevitably drive the actions of all of the individuals within this ocean system. So the governments are very important for that. They enforce the laws, they develop the laws, and um, they help suggest new laws. However, the governments are not the only player in the system, and although they arguably, and I'm sure people will argue with me, this is my opinion, they're probably the most important, again, because the governments create these policies that people actually need to adhere to. Although they're the most important, they're not the although they're the most critical, they're not necessarily the most important, is how I should probably say it. Without these other stakeholders here, none of this would work. So NGOs, communities, and private industry are all part of the ocean map. The private industry are the fishers, are the tourists, are the shipping vessels that carry things all around the world. The private industry are the actual people that are in the ocean doing whatever they're doing every day. The communities are also part of that the private industry, but they're the ones who rely on the ocean for safety, for economy, for food, for all these different things. So the private industry and the communities, they're a part of the everyday ocean interactions, and they are responsible for the extraction, but also in the management of the ocean. So they help suggest laws, they help adhere to laws, they are responsible for enforcing the laws on their own, and they're a critical piece, especially communities. I think everybody on this call knows how important communities are to the management of the ocean ecosystems, and that they're all essential. And then next is the NGOs. The NGOs, I'm sure some of you work for NGOs. Obviously, Paul and Aquaworld is a really great NGO, and they're an example of Aquaworld's a really good example of the importance of NGOs. NGOs are the ones who really do the work to drive a lot of sustainability in the oceans, whether that's suggesting policies to the governments to sign. The governments have limited people. They can't do all this thinking. They can't do all this research. They can't do all this on their own. They actually do a small fraction of it. The NGOs are really who drives a lot of this work. The research, the project implementation, the advocacy, the training, the capacity building, all of that is really driven by NGOs. And when all of these players work together in the ocean management ecosystem, that's when we have success. So, for example, with the tuna, all of these players were needed in the Atlantic bluefin tuna conservation. The private industry needed to listen to the laws that the government made. The private industry also needed to develop more sustainable practices, come up with technology like video monitoring, technology like weak hooks, which is a type of hook that breaks off if the species or if the tuna is too large, and all these different sustainability measures. The private industry needed to help implement those and come up with those. The communities are the ones that were doing the fishing and doing the consuming. They needed to come up with strategic ways to find other fish to consume apart from bluefin tuna, to find sustainable ways of harvesting these tunas, and all these different things, educate themselves, and all these different things that led to less fishing pressure on the tunas. The NGOs helped suggest the laws that the regional fishery management organizations in the United Nations developed. The NGOs helped build satellite tracking technology to track illegal fishing vessels. The NGOs helped put money towards enforcement and investment in enforcement. So, it's all to say that without all these stakeholders working together, governance is impossible. And that's something that's very important to take out of this call is that no matter what industry, what sector we all work in, what sector you all work in, you're a very important piece to the governance of our oceans. And I think it's a really important thing to remember, and it's something that should really be inspiring to everyone, that everybody plays a critical role in the governance of our oceans. So I think we're getting towards time. Paul, we end at the hour, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I have some more I wanted to talk about, but unfortunately, we are getting there on time. So I'm just going to go through these last slides very, very fast, and then I want to give a few minutes for any questions that we might have. So I get really excited talking about this, so I talk and I talk. Um, so again, the ocean governance, the kind of the flow of things that's really important to know is there's scientific advice. So we have some researchers on this call. Research is essential. So we develop strong science, strong research to understand the health of the ocean, the health of certain species, the impacts of certain activities, of pollution, of fishing. The science really builds the picture of where we're at with the resources in the ocean. Then the the science goes to a vote. And for example, the ICAT Commission is the Regional Fishery Management Organization for tunas in the Atlantic. But this can be the International Seabed Authority, any of the international or regional authorities. The science influences the policy design. The policy goes to a vote, it's agreed, and then it's implemented by all of the nations that are a part of that international body. And then it's enforced and monitored by the international organizations like the UN, and Interpol, and things like that, all the way to each individual nation. So again, important to know the flow of how we get from observation and science to actual action. This was an example of illegal fishing, how we're addressing that. It's similar to the tuna, so I'm not going to go through it because of our time. I mentioned already the High Seas Treaty. And finally, I just wanted to again mention that the ocean needs all of you. The reason you're on this call is because you want to be leaders in the ocean space. And it's very exciting, and I'm very thankful that we all are working on the governance of the oceans. And I'm really excited to see what you all do, and I really hope you all do a lot of great work. And whether that's in research and analysis, law and advocacy, or enforcement and tech, these are all ways that we can work within science, within policy, within industry to really ensure sustainable oceans for the future. And again, thankful to all of you for all the work that you do, and I hope that you continue to make an impact. So that is the end of my presentation. I hope that was. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you for joining. I hope that was helpful. There's so much more to talk about. This was a short time. But this is good to, again, just to learn a bit about and to understand what ocean governance is, what all goes into it. So I'm glad it was helpful. I hope it was. And yeah, does anybody have any questions? We have a couple minutes.
Okay, so I think okay, who has a question?
Should I go ahead?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Hi, thank you so much. That was quite an insightful presentation. So you did mention something. So for someone who has interest in a particular aspect of the ocean, you have to get to learn the organizations in charge of that particular area you're interested in. So where would you say, for example, it's biodiversity conservation, where would you typically advise such a person to start from?
Yeah, to make sure I'm hearing your question right, it's to learn about the international governance around biodiversity.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a search on the internet, like international biodiversity governance, would lead you to the right places. But specifically, what I would suggest you do is to look at the High Seas Treaty. It's a very big law that was just passed by the United Nations and is now officially in the international law of the sea. But the High Seas Treaty is the first implementing law that can be enforced by the United Nations. It's the first law specifically focused on biodiversity. And that law develops everything from targets to conserve 30 by 30, so 30% of the ocean by 2030 and beyond. It develops laws around pollution, fishing, and all these different things that have to do with biodiversity. It's a law that took years and years to pass, and it's very exciting. It just went into effect January 2026. So, Dr. on Wubiko, I hope I'm saying that right. I would highly suggest you look at the High Seas Treaty, learn about that, and also look into everything that the United Nations are doing and the FAO and a lot of the big NGOs.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay, thank you once again for the very, very insightful presentation. I'm sure all of our audience and those that would also be catching up with the recordings would have applicable information distilled in them. Thank you so much. So everyone, thank you so much for joining our 28th edition of the Ocean Leadership Series. We're going to ensure that after we've properly published the recordings on YouTube, we would send the recording to everyone to catch up all over again. And if you are yet to sign up to our newsletters, we send monthly newsletters where we would also attach the recording to thousands of subscribers. And also, if you missed that, you can catch it up on. We'll be also sending the recording to different social media platforms. So you can also look forward to that once again. Thank you to all our viewers here and those that are joining on YouTube. Thank you so much. We wish everyone a wonderful weekend. We trust that you've enhanced your knowledge about the global ocean governance structure from the local point of view to the international framework. Thank you so much to our wonderful speaker, Mr. Panos. Maybe another time or through another platform, when Aquaworld eventually begin our course series, we could go deeper into this. Thank you so much, Mr. Panos, for joining us, and to all the members of Aquaworld and also our friends from the general public. We wish everyone a wonderful weekend. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul,
Thank
for
you so
organizing
much.
this.
Thank you. Thank you.